What would New Zealand look like if British ships never arrived in the 1800s? No Treaty of Waitangi, no land wars, well, at least not with the British, no colonization maybe. Let's imagine a world where this never happened and explore some possible scenarios of how the land we now call New Zealand could have looked. Scenario 1. The United Tribes of Aotearoa. If the British never colonised New Zealand, it's possible that at some point the various Māori iwi or tribes of the land could have eventually united to form one country. Now, I'm aware of the whole argument that the name Aotearoa might not be a real Māori name, but for simplicity's sake, let's just say it is and call this country the United Tribes of Aotearoa. And again, for simplicity's sake, I'll use an English name as I've got no idea what a realistic Māori name for such a country would be. Now, of course, it's just as possible that Māori tribes continue to fight amongst themselves instead of against colonial forces, but let's say that at some point, either peacefully or by force, they do get together and create some sort of confederation. If this happened, Paihia in the Upper North Island becomes the nation's capital. It's got a great harbour, a mild climate, and because of all these things, it's where most of the population lives already. Speaking of population, if this nation came to be at some point, let's say around the early 20th century, the population of the United Tribes of Aotearoa would likely be quite small, probably around 100,000 people or so, as this is the number that's often cited by historians when it comes to how many Māori there were in the late 1800s. Other settlements further south, like Te Whanganui Atara, the city we currently call Wellington, wouldn't really develop more until technology progressed enough to make settling the South Island easier so that the city becomes a more viable port between the two islands. And speaking of technology, what kind of technology would the United Tribes of Aotearoa have? Well, we can go down two possible scenarios here. One where non-Māori never interacted at all with Māori, and one where Māori traded regularly with visitors from neighbouring countries like Australia, French Polynesia, and other Pacific Island nations. If we're talking about the former, where Māori never interacted at all with non-Māori, the United Tribes of Aotearoa would likely stay quite technologically and economically poor by global standards of the time. By all accounts, when Europeans first arrived in New Zealand, Māori society was technologically stone-aged. They hadn't developed metallurgy or writing yet, and without these, it's likely that the country's main settlements would remain sort of hunter-gatherer type communities with a bit of agriculture going on here and there, but of course then again, they didn't have a lot of crops for agriculture in those days either. The main crop they did have, of course, though, was kumara, but there wasn't any wheat or a significant amount of animal husbandry going on. However, with the tribes united under one rule eventually, it is possible that increased trade around the country would speed up technological development. How long would this take though? It's hard to say. It took other societies in other parts of the world around 5,000 to 6,000 years to go from Stone Age to Bronze Age. But let's say we look at a scenario where the United Tribes of Aotearoa regularly trade with non-Māori, then it'd be safe to say that this would significantly speed up the development of science and technology for Māori. New crops, farm animals, tools and ideas would flow into the capital city of Paihia and gradually spread across the country. Thanks to new imported technologies and goods, the South Island, with its colder climate, would now be much easier to settle and live in. Settlements like Whakatū, what we now call Nelson, and Otautahi, Christchurch, would begin to grow larger and larger. And what would the population and culture look like? With the population being close to 100% Māori, Māori language, culture, traditions would be the norm across the land. Having said that, it's hard to imagine that Christian missionaries wouldn't reach the United Tribes and have some sort of impact on Māori society though. It's quite likely that missions would pop up around the country and some Māori would become Christians, especially in the main population centres of the Upper North Island. So the United Tribes of Aotearoa is one possibility, but in all likelihood, if the British had never decided to set up shop here, then some other European power would have, and that probably would have been the French. Let's face it, the French were pretty active in the South Pacific in the 19th century. It's well documented that they did indeed try to start a colony of their own in the South Island town of Akaroa. which famously to this day still shows a lot of links to its French colonial heritage. They were just a little bit late to the party though, and by the time the first French settlers did arrive in 1840, the Treaty of Waitangi between the British Crown and many of New Zealand's iwi had already been signed. But you can bet your bottom franc or euro that they would have made a claim on New Zealand if the Brits already hadn't. After all, at the time, the French already had colonies in nearby New Caledonia and French Polynesia. Snagging New Zealand would have been a huge win for the French Empire, as it would have been one of their largest colonies, outside of Africa at least. So what would the French have called New Zealand? Nouvelle-Zélande, perhaps? Actually, it's what they were already calling it in their maps at the time, so why not? What about the main towns and cities though? Instead of Auckland, we might get something like Port de Tamaki. French naming conventions are often similar to the British conventions, where they typically rebadge an existing town. So instead of Wellington, maybe you get Nouvelle Napoleon or something. I don't know. The country would probably be governed much like New Caledonia and other French colonies of the time. Unlike the British style of colonialism, where colonies would often become fully independent states, French colonies are often controlled centrally from Paris. A governor is appointed, and the territory is more or less a province of France, with the people being French citizens, complete with a French passport. The capital city would probably be Akaroa, given that it was the first French settlement in the country. And what about the Māori? Well, it's fair to assume that they would get similar treatment to the Canucks of New Caledonia and the Tahitians of French Polynesia, who didn't get French citizenship, by the way, and the right to vote until just after World War II, despite being ruled by the French for almost 100 years at that point. So don't expect a Treaty of Akaroa or something similar. Māori rights and citizenship would likely be complicated and a point of contention under French rule. French would of course be the official language, but because integration of Māori might not be as common as it is today, Māori language might actually still be widely used among Māori. The legal system would be different too. It'd be based on the Napoleonic Code, which at the time granted fewer rights to women than men, and is traditionally more authoritative and complex than the common law system we have in New Zealand today. The main religion would be Roman Catholic, tradies would most likely be reaching for a baguette and a steak and cheese pie at lunchtime, rugby would still be popular, but not as we know it. Overall, a New Zealand colonised by the French would be quite different to the New Zealand we know today. But we'd have better cheese, I guess. It's fun to play what if. What do you think would have become of New Zealand if the British hadn't colonised it? And hey, if you're more interested in what's been going on in the real New Zealand these days, then why not check out this video here.